Very good morning and hello to everybody joining us today with this wonderful chat with Dr. Matthew Lippincott. Dr. Matt is a well-known professional into EI and an important person at Goleman EI, building many programs. We are fortunate today that he is with us, and we will be discussing today about various aspects of effective leadership, cultural shift, biases, and ways to shift and become an effective leader for your own self and for society. Matt was here last year at Mindfulness India Summit 2018. This year again, we are fortunate that he is joining with a newer insight, with new studies and new data to enrich you with the new information to bring that positive shift within yourself. I will not take much of a time now. Are you excited?
Very excited, extremely pleased to be here again, and very humbled to be welcomed back. So it was a great experience last year.
I believe you have a lot of experience during this whole year while Goleman EI launched various programs, and you have been doing many of these programs and meeting so many participants. Share some of the new insights you got it.
Sure. We have launched a number of paid pilots, and we've done a lot of training for executive leadership coaching programs. And in the course of that activity, obviously, we've met with and done consulting and assessments for a lot of organizations just to try and figure out what their needs really are.
Indian people are now looking forward because the landscape is changing in India as far as both in workplace and a personal sphere. And emotional intelligence plays a very critical role. And after the first summit, and we are now ready for the next one to share more insight, knowledge and experience with people who are now joining in. What do you think, what you will be sharing this year?
This year I'm focusing primarily on some actionable information about how people can take emotional intelligence concepts and work with them in a work environment and even in their personal relationships.
While working for the last 1 year, we also been working as a Beyond Mind, and we have set up a new Mindfulness Science Center, which has been working, where the research is very on the forefront for us to do more empirical studies and see what exactly happens. And I think your insight and knowledge would be very handy for such kind of information. One thing which comes very often to us is that behavior is very difficult to shift. And we all experience as a facilitator, as a trainer, is that behavior is something very difficult to shift. What do you think, what would be the main reason for having such inability to shift behavior, and what is the difficulty people face?
Well, you're correct that behavior is difficult to change. And if we look at workplace environments in particular, the environment is a key part of that issue because people have adapted to that environment and they're responding to the cues and the social signals and interactions all day. So they have to become more aware of what they're responding to and how they're responding to it if they're going to actually change their behavior in a meaningful way.
Authenticity and unconscious bias. Does this go together?
Absolutely. When we look at authenticity, that really means the way that a person shows up in front of other people in their interactions. And in order for that to change, for a person to become more authentic, they really need to understand how they might have subconscious bias that influences the way they show up in their interactions with other people.
Matt, I've seen while training so many senior people that cognitive biases and various other biases, which we definitely talk in this discussion, unconscious bias is one of the most difficult one, and we are unaware of it, that it's coming back and back again. And we have these biases. We can see ethnic biases, we talk about in-group, out-group biases, we talk about gender biases. As a leader, how do you think these biases play a role both in positive and negative?
Well, fortunately, because of a lot of recent neuroscience research, we know that those biases are, for the most part, hardwired into our brain as part of our primal survival mechanism. And what's important about that is that it allows us as individuals to not try and blame ourselves or others for biased behavior. It gives us a starting point of accepting that we just have those tendencies and we can work on it from that point of acceptance instead of kind of blaming ourselves for having biases that we think are negative. It's a great starting point, I think.
Yes, very true. In fact, one of my discussion with one of a very senior personnel, and he says, you know, when I do being mindful, I have a challenge because then I can see myself very clearly, and my biases are somehow bothers me. And definitely that's also a very critical point. When you are aware and your biases can be seen, does have a positive or negative impact on a person?
Well, I think it can feel negative. As you said in your example, a person becomes aware of a bias and they feel it's a negative. However, the fact that they became consciously aware of it is an important starting point to actually do something about it. And even a forgiveness of oneself for having a bias is an okay place to start, I've found, because it allows a person to then work on controlling the way that bias affects them.
And you're right, like there's a lot of genetic built up on it. You know, you have genomes which is pushing you to do things, think in a different fashion and a manner, and it's you are hardwired. Your brain is actually so hardly designed to go in that direction, and just knowing that you're being pushed in that direction is first level of awareness. It's awakening actually. And there is a very interesting saying in that it's not about correcting, but it's being aware of what is happening to you is the first step towards your journey of self-enlightenment. This attitude plays a critical aspect in leadership. How does an EI play a role in cultivating a positive mindset?
Well, the foundation of EI is self-awareness. So it has a relationship to the subject we're discussing right now. And that really is a foundation because it gives us the information we need to actually start changing the way we interact with other people. So going back to this example, once we're aware of things such as a bias or even a prejudice or a negative reaction, if we don't have that self-awareness, we have no chance of changing the way that we react to that and behave in front of other people. So the starting point is always that insight about ourselves and who we truly are, and then accepting that non-judgmentally so that we can move forward from that point.
That's a very, very important point, Matt, you have raised, that judgment is one of the key aspects both in emotional intelligence as well as in mindfulness. And this giving up judgment is one of the most difficult tasks. How do you think organizations suffer because of unconscious biases and not giving up judgments?
I think the main reason they suffer, which is also their biggest opportunity for improvement, is in not acknowledging those exist. Those are the things that are referred to as organizational structures or organizational culture. Many times they're not written clearly, but everyone seems to have a perception or understanding of what the values and the judgment criteria are. And if that can be openly acknowledged, that gives people, again, a starting point to at least try and address issues around judgment or bias.
And I've seen in Indian context that we are very strongly biased about many things. And a lot of organizations do suffer while you, just like you said rightly, that not acknowledging that unconscious biases give them not a room for improvement first. And how do you think can these organizations start to understand the effect? And then the second point comes, how do they improve it?
Probably the fastest way an organization would become comfortable with this idea is to implement a few changes that produce results fairly quickly. One of the easiest examples is changing the way people feel comfortable asking for help or admitting that they made a mistake. So if we take that out of a kind of a punitive context and change the culture to where people are rewarded for asking for help early on, instead of trying to cover up that they have some risks or some fears or they made some mistakes, then you send a message to the whole organization that it's more supportive. It's actually interested in enabling people to be successful long-term rather than judging them for perceived short-term failures.
Recently, I was doing a program in Ahmedabad on decision making of neuroscience. And I came across very burning questions from the people that decision is one thing which is very crucial, and biases plays a very critical role in decision making. Give us some examples of where do people fail because of unconscious biases.
In decision making in particular, leaders often make mistakes because they are fearful and they are subjecting themselves to this criteria of judgment. They don't want to appear weak, they don't want to appear to have failed, and so they tend to overcompensate and focus more on things that would, let's say, take a decision that shows they were more confident or stronger leader than they actually are. And they don't realize that that sometimes harms them, versus taking a decision and involving other people, distributing a lot more of their responsibility so that they involve their whole team in making a much more well-educated, well-rounded decision.
Very true, and I think you need a lot of courage to do that, to exhibit your vulnerability and sometimes your inability to take a decision, because practically it's impossible for any human being to take 100% correct decisions. I had a lot of organization. I had about 18,000 people working under me at one time. It is impossible to have all your decisions going right, but it's very important that you are making decisions and you are not biased, you're not making hard judgments about things. And I felt that EI is a very critical aspect in awareness. So if somebody understands that is a limitation for him, what's the starting point for him?
Actually, if it's a person in a leadership role or anyone in a working environment, there's a very simple solution, which is that we open a dialogue of sharing. So if we're working together and I'm open to you giving me some feedback and helping me with some of these issues, even if it's something as simple as saying, the way you came across in this meeting shut me down and made me not want to help you, it made me not want to contribute to your success, then I've activated a very powerful lever in my own performance, because I start having multiple people around me that can contribute to me making a more informed decision.
But yes, very true. An open dialogue can actually open many new things, different relationship, very different level of communication, collaboration, creativity, trust on top of it. And then I think any organization dealing with open dialogue are definitely on a route to progress for sure, and a leader definitely. And there is a very critical aspect which plays a role is psychological safety. A leader can initiate a discussion, but as a person on the receiving end, if he only opens up when he feels psychological safe. Do you think it's an important aspect for an organization to cultivate or make a culture of psychological safety?
I believe it's extremely important, and I'm sure there's plenty of research that shows that's a key contributor to an organization's performance. And you can even link the psychological safety concept back to how I just answered the last question, because people are looking for me to follow through on my commitment to be a more authentic leader, to be more supportive. And I can say a lot of things that seem right. The first thing that will happen is they'll be skeptical. So is the organization really going to change? Is this person just saying what they're supposed to right now because they're trying to shift the culture? Will they actually change? So the consistency becomes a major responsibility of the leader in terms of demonstrating over and over again that they do care about creating that environment where there's open dialogue and participation.
Very, very true. And I think psychological safety is one of the key ingredient to firstly get out of that non-judgmental behaviors, cognitive biases, and creating both psychological and mental safety for people to feel comfortable in an environment. Do organizational culture also plays a critical role in this aspect?
Absolutely. The culture itself has to be guided to a certain extent. It's not just, though, by things that we typically see like framework or the architecture of the organization and how people are involved in maybe intervening to try and create psychological safety. You really have to have the key people day in, day out demonstrating that behavior, because as humans, we have that herd mentality and people want to stay in the herd, and they'll tend to emulate the behavior of the leaders. because on a deep level, they feel they need to do that for a purpose of safety and membership in that group.
So what do you think? It's a neuroplasticity. It happens that you start copying your leader, you start copying the same behavior, emulating the same kind of traits what your leader is carrying.
Yeah, it's definitely an adaptability to the environment, and the deepest part of that is a need to feel safe within that group, and that takes us right back to psychological safety. A good leader sees that people are going to actually do things they don't agree with sometimes because they want to stay in the group. So a good leader can either could and should use that as a reason to show them that they can be more open and more comfortable, and it's safe in that group to share their perspectives and to give honest feedback, as long as it's focused on the benefit of the whole group.
And I think a lot of organizations understand, but difficult to implement. It's very easy to say, but very difficult to implement, because taking a feedback could be a very tricky point. And again, the conscious biases plays here again, that when the feedbacks are given, how receptive you are to the feedback, both for a leader as well as an organization. Do you think organizations do take a negative feedback and do positive work towards it?
It's certainly possible, and there are organizations that have demonstrated a real commitment to trying to do that type of work, and they keep changing and increasing the framework within which employees can provide feedback. Sometimes it's anonymous, sometimes it's almost real time using digital platforms. The reality, though, is the person who's receiving the feedback has to react in such a way that it encourages continual feedback. And so that's where we all need development, first of all, and acknowledging that fact that no one's perfect in that role is an important step. A person can ask for help in the way that they deliver feedback as well. So if you give me feedback and it causes me to react negatively, it's even better if you help me share with you how I responded to that. And we can work through my reaction to the point where we have an even more honest and meaningful dialogue in the future.
Very, very true. And I think a lot of maturity is required to actually take negative feedback, and it's sometimes impossible because, again, your biases still again comes and play a role, and for any human being, taking a negative feedback is not that easy. How mindful I could be, but negative definitely hits you some point in time. How do I manage that negative connotation happening within me inside?
Being aware of it is the starting point. And again, accepting the fact that maybe you do feel negatively, accepting the fact that maybe you want to take that feedback and twist it around and make yourself feel good by saying that person is wrong and they don't know what they're talking about. In my research, I've heard a lot of stories like that of they're out to get me, this is a big scheme to misinform my performance ratings. People have shared all kinds of examples like that with me. Those are people, though, who worked beyond that because they consciously recognized they were doing that. They realized it was harmful to their own progress. And because they were aware of it, they were able to change it.
Yes, I think you rightly pointed out towards that, your ability to deal with that information is very, very critical. And being aware that what is happening rather than reacting towards it, it's acknowledging is more important. India, which has been has under the colonial rules for a very long time, we still have biases. I will still say that it's still lingering around. The newer generation coming, definitely the hangover is over. But still we have residues lingering around in the environment, and a lot of organizations still talk about command control. In fact, this is the same question I'm going to put to Dr. Daniel Goleman about it. So what do you think organizations who are not ready for feedback, both negative, positive, what is their future?
Well, their future is performance, and it's competitive agility. If they stay in the command control structure, which, as we know, is linked back, I think, to World War I, European military hierarchies, and to this day, there are still many organizations around the world practicing some variation of that leadership theory. The ability to react to the changes and the shifts of demand in a global economy are either going to destroy that organization or force them to change. And actually, I think we're seeing a lot of that, as you said, with the younger generations. They're not at all willing to participate in that type of a structure. And it's not to say that they say it's bad, but they see it's also ineffective, and maybe they don't want to participate in it because they feel like it's a wasting their time. A lot of younger people, younger professionals, just want to be highly effective, and they're willing to point to the fact that these older management and leadership hierarchical structures are not enabling their performance that way.
In fact, we have touched upon many points. My next would be that how do you see future of AI? Where do you think organizations will be taking, and how leaders will be imbibing emotional intelligence? And do you think any development in the field of emotional intelligence in time to come?
Well, there's actually a lot happening now. As you know, at Goleman EI, actually deploying a lot of very scalable, digitally based solutions that are intended to help millions of people develop EI versus what it was a few years ago when it had to be delivered in person by an expensive consultant or coach. And what's interesting about that is the demand and the interest is very high as well, which is very encouraging for us. So looking at ways to make this accessible to a vastly larger population has the opportunity for all of us to see some change. And I see that in, again, the younger generations in particular in the workforce. They're already forcing changes in major corporations and their culture and their priorities. And they're the ones who are really demanding a lot of this training. So because they outnumber senior leadership, it's interesting to see that the senior leadership is contacting our organization and other organizations to try and get more EI training for that purpose.
What one message you would like to give to a newer generation who are coming to a new to the workforce environment? How do they cultivate some of the emotional intelligence traits in their behavior so then they become an effective leader in time to come?
I think the message, not only for the younger generations, but even for the senior leadership, is look at what the other people you're working with care about. And that's always a great starting point to build a powerful and effective relationship. Think about what they care about and what their needs are, and whether or not your interaction with them is supporting that. All the other things will come once you've built a relationship that's mutually beneficial. That always opens the door for stronger EI development in a relationship, in a team, and an organization.
Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing this insight. And I think what comes out from this discussion is that we cannot get away from our unconscious biases. But definitely, if we positively work towards changing our behavior, building a positive mindset, things can be easier for us and for others. And what last point Matt raised, that if you are aware about your own self and you are ready for this change and you are accepting other people as an environment, acceptance plays a very critical role. And that's the starting point for building change and becoming an effective leader for your own self, for your organization, and for society. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming and giving this interview. We welcome you again to Mindfulness India Summit 2019. We hope you will enjoy and share your insights with all the participants.
Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much.